Thank you for letting me slip back and forth. I might throw in some some fancy. So yes, I met Georgia back in 2004 when we were teaching together, and I noticed that ASFM had a theater next door, and asked them if they would give me $500 to start a children's theater. And they gave me $5,000 by accident, I think. And we ended up running that theater for 3 years and paying the school back and then running it at a profit. And we were writing musicals and having kids write shows. In fact, Per Santos is here, who is the star of The Sound of Music and was like a pivotal person in, well, honestly, in my life here, but also like in the theater program. So it's really nice to see a former student who I've always thought is a colleague, even when she was 10. So we had a lot of fun. But when I teach music, I teach like theater, music, art all together. It was everything kind of like mixed together. And I think that comes from growing up in a very kind of hyper creative family where both of my parents were business owners. So my father was a developer, an engineer, an architect, self-taught, and my mom was a publisher of children's art books, also self-taught. She decided to start a publishing house and just did, and became a leading force in changing how art was taught in the United States and Canada, especially at the primary level. So instead of focusing on the product and like making like little cute chickens out of cotton balls, she would focus on the process of exploring art and invention. And my dad was doing the same thing with us. So my sister and I were the test subjects of my mother for her books. And we were also like the happy recipients of anything that came home from the job site. So my father would come home and like dump a giant pile of wood and scraps on the driveway and say, go into the woods and build a house. And I think the types of things that we learned in this like really exploratory kind of like mid 70s, mid 80s kind of childhood is that you can do absolutely anything and you don't need to be told how to do it. So that's really given me this kind of courage when it comes to approaching things, which we'll get to when we get to how I found out about paper cutting. I believe in any human can do any human thing. So if somebody can do it, so can you. So honestly and truly, any one of you could pick up a pair of scissors and knock one of these out. It doesn't mean that we're all at the same level right away, but everyone's capable of every single thing. So this is, I'll start here. I titled this visual narrative because everything that I do in my life, like it looks like I have lots of different careers, but for me, it's all one career. It's the career of making things in the world. It's the career of bringing people in and including people, raising people up, raising myself up if I can, trying things out, kind of cartwheeling and tumbleweeding through life, and getting as many experiences as possible. It's been fun. Sometimes it's really lucrative, and sometimes it is scant, and you are like truly enjoying your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But I do approach, like when I am a writer, I approach writing visually first. So this paper cut is actually from a musical that I wrote called Hansel and Gretel and Heidi and Gunther. The music was written by Will Aronson. I don't know if any of you have seen Maybe Happy Ending on Broadway, but he wrote the music for that and just got 6 Tony Awards. We unfortunately were opening on March 12th, 2020. So we didn't open and we all lost our shirts instead. But that is the title opening to the show, the stage directions. When I write stage directions, sometimes like a designer will appreciate it. Other designers, they skip over them. But I really write from a visual place first. When I start a musical or I start a book, I will draw all of the characters first. I'll draw the setting. I'll draw all of the costumes. I build like a visual kind of world and board, and then I share it with my collaborators. And I feel like that brings us all to a place where we're all talking about the same thing. We're all living in the same house, and it really, really helps. So I don't know what slides are next. I built this last night because clearly that's how I do everything. Let's see. Oh, a brief history of paper cutting. So we'll start with paper cutting since this is an art talk. It started in China. All around the world, paper was being invented about the same time, about 40 to 75 AD. It was popping up in China, it popped up in Egypt, it popped up here in Mesoamerica, and all these different cultures kind of discovered how to make paper at the same time. I kind of think, some of the cultures thought that it was like the paper was imbued with magical properties. And I was like, oh, that's kind of like now with the AI, it's like popping up everywhere. And people are like, I really think it's going to take off and have its own consciousness and be my friend. And you're like, maybe. 1,300 years later, paper cutting emerged as a craft in China. They basically did it in a very stylized way, a very kind of like meditative way. And they fold the paper in half and cut it. Well, they would trace it and cut, and then cut it out with scissors without breaking the structure. And you were not allowed to use any glue, which I really appreciate. Like, I like it. Let's like make it a little harder. But it had this really nice yin-yang balanced symmetry. And there were two methods. One where you kind of cut the paper away and it would fall away and leave an outline of a character or something. Or this one where you cut around and the paper is what's left over. Like the art is what's left over. So this came along to Switzerland and Amsterdam, Germany by the Silk Road. So as paper was making its way north to Europe, also paper cutting was making its way with the people on the boats or the people on the little wagons driving the spices. And it hit Switzerland like a bomb, and everybody's like, this is amazing. We're going to have something to do all winter while we're sitting in our houses with our cows. And they used scissors that looked like this to make things like that.
Wow.
I've tried, and when I use scissors like this, my stuff looks like a 4-year-old made it, whose mother still loves them anyway. Like, it's really, really hard to do. They also use sheep shears. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they're like squeezy sheep shears. Yeah. So paper cutting came to North America, like the upper part of North America, with the Dutch, not with the Dutch, but the German and Swiss immigrant families. And they brought the stories with them. They brought the motifs with them. And then it kind of crashed into this whole Americana thing. So there's lots of like eagles in patterns, or they'll have like flags waving, kind of more colonial types of things like that. And here at the same time in Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Aztec, and the Otomi were also inventing paper, more as to use for the codices and the codexes, but they also carved it and hung it up for decorating during festivals in the temples, the streets, the houses. It was actually used more as a ritual in rituals and ceremonies, so it was kind of imbued with this magical property, which when the Spanish came was a big problem, because the Spanish wanted everybody to do what they wanted. So they outlawed the making of amado. And it was super forbidden, up to the death penalty for making this paper. They wanted them to use no paper at all, because if you have no paper, you have no way of passing secret notes. I'm sure there were other reasons, but that's what I think was going on. That paper was made by with fig and mulberry trees, and they would boil it with lime and then pound it into a pulp. And the oldest one that was found, I think, was found, oops, I go back one, like 75 CE. So in the year 75, just back when we were all starting out, in Jalisco in a shaft of a tomb. It was like crumpled up, and they were able to unfold it and carbon date it. But pretty cool. You all know about papel picado. For me, I didn't realize that papel picado was made with little machias, like little hammers and tools, because I actually used something else. But this really exploded in the 1920s, and then in the 60s, it kind of boomed across Mexico. But why wouldn't it? It's the best. But the paper cutting traditions were popping up all over the world, and each culture kind of had their own methods and styles. This is Polish wycinanki. They do a lot of trees of life, flowers, but they also do everything layered. And unlike the Chinese they are allowed to use glue. In fact, it's like a major component. A lot of the Polish households would decorate the walls. So in the spring, they would like strip all of the old paper cuts off the walls. They'd use them for curtains. They'd throw them all away, and then they'd make new ones and put them back up. So it was a constantly changing art form where I'm like super precious about mine. I'm like, wash your hands because the oil on your finger is gonna like ruin that in 10 years. They're like, throw it in the trash. So I try to emulate that, but I can't get there. My friend Sam Rubel made this one. It's modern. So this one was just made last year. And it's a red-winged blackbird party. If you kind of look around, it's actually birds like surrounding little trees that are coming into the center. And he lives in Louisiana, and so he also does a lot of scenes of like Acadian life and things like that. In the Polish tradition, they do like lots of farming scenes, things. And in Belarus, it's actually spiritual again. So it like shifts back into this other realm where each little cut, like if you look at the buffalo, each of those cuts has a significance. And you're actually putting a lot of this like ancient kind of tree and spirit and earth stuff into the cuts as you make them. And they really highly focus on animals, snowflakes, flowers, and stars. Those are my friend Vola Palanusa. She just had to escape Belarus and leave her entire museum behind because she was speaking out against what the government was doing. But you can see here that it's like just decorated all over the walls as art. Sometimes they also do like papel picado. They also use the little marchia. So I'm going to take you back in time to when I was a darling child in the late 70s, early 80s. That's my first painting. My mother saved it, and you can already see how talented I was. I really liked art right off the bat. And my parents just kind of threw us in and let us do things. These are my very special pumpkins that I made when I was 3. Obviously, that's a ghost. And that's my cat, Dooley. That's my father, who's right above. And then there in the center is my sister and I. She's dressed up as Laura Ingalls Wilder from the Little House on the Prairie series. And I'm dressed up as Hava from Fiddler on the Roof, which I just saw at my dad's 30th birthday party. It was on television. And that musical hit me like a bomb. And I wanted to know, how could I become Jewish? Where is the shtetl? Where can I live in? Where is my headscarf? What shoes do I have that look like shoes that they wear in Fiddler on the Roof? I chose my pink slippers. That was as close as I could get, and a dirndl from Germany, but you do what you can. That musical embedded itself in me in a really fundamental time, and was a shaper of my life artistically. Like I think I dressed up as Havala for Halloween pretty much every year for 3 years, and I marched in a parade with a sign that said Hava, so nobody would think I was a gypsy. I was pretty worried. I also started writing pretty early. Trigger warning, there's some references to suicide in my first book. This book I wrote when I was in 2nd grade about the Care Bears. It's called Christmas in Care-a-Lot. And there's some Care Bears that find out that Santa's not coming to Care-a-Lot because he doesn't know how to get there. And they're pretty upset. And they send Santa Bear as a substitute, and they're like, "The hell is that? Santa Bear might." And so they start to kill themselves. Just two. So this one says, they were so upset, one hung himself by a rope. And then this one says, another jumped off his cloud, and he says, bye-bye. I also had this very early aversion to stories that were like, it was all a dream. I had just seen a movie before I wrote this book where at the end of the movie, the kid woke up and it was all a dream. And I was like, I just invested 2 hours in this production. And I'm like, granted, I got like a candy bar, but other than that, I was really angry. And so I had mine was like, it was not a dream. Santa had found the Care Bears and they made it through Christmas with 2 less bears. But this is a little poem that I wrote so I know like my art looks really cute, but my humor is really dark and off. But this is from, I think, 3rd grade. I know I spelled losing wrong, but be kind. So when the losing lovebird's girlfriend kissed him, he lost his head. When she held his hand, he lost his wing. When she kicked him, he lost his leg. When they got in a fight, he lost her. And I thought that was pretty meaningful.
Wow.
So, about that same time, I kept going through these phases of art. And I don't know if you have artistic kids in your life, but like I would discover Fimo dough. And I would go like insane for Fimo dough. And I would go all the way to a mastery where like if you sliced my little log of Fimo dough, it looked like a bead you would have to buy at the store. And then I would discover origami. And I would go all the way to mastery with origami. And kind of over and over and over again. I liked collecting things. I liked collecting skills. And my mom pointed out to me that while I thought that I discovered paper cutting in my 30s, she's like, oh no, you went through a total phase. This is the only one I had a picture of, but apparently my most favorite motif was a man with a sombrero riding a burro with like a saguaro cactus and an Aztec pyramid in the background. She's like, yeah, you had like 40 of those. And then I would paint a sunset, very dramatic. I loved everything I made. You made my mom keep it. So I wanted to talk to you about like the 2 types of things that I do in my career. With writing, you're taking a page and you're putting things onto it so that you can share it with other people. You put things on to create a story. So we're going to start with addition because that's where I started. I'm just holding my knife. You may recognize some of these adorable children or maybe you might recognize Georgia standing there. She's a little blurry, but in a cool coat. Like she was always cool. Yeah, so this is the little theater that we had at ASFM. This was a musical that I wrote called Gardenia with like Pilar Diaz and Vivi Dewey, if you know those kids, Adrian, Sebastian, all these nice kids there. This is The Sound of Music, and you may recognize Fer Santos. She's also sitting right here with us. She played Maria, and I can't tell you how professional these kids were. But we painted all of the set ourselves with Marga Garza, who's a local artist here who was teaching art at the time. We designed the costumes, and then the kids had them made. And there's Alex Prado and Catalina Echeverry, lots of really sweet kids that you might know now as 30-year-olds. And then we just knocked it out. So this is, I was also told by the director of the school that I needed to have an Himno Nacional competition choir or the school was going to lose their funding because it was a law that we had to compete. But we won. Like we won the city and then we won the state because I think I would talk to the kids. I'm like, okay, now imagine the words. Like the streets are running with blood. Your shoes are sticking to the blood, and you're waving the flag. You will not stop. Sing, and they really got into it and sang hard. But we were doing a lot of art in the classroom as well, and dance and writing radio plays and making instruments. So it was a really kind of like interactive class. It was really fun. I thought it was fun. But I still am friends with a lot of those nice kids. Yeah. We did have a good time together. After I left ASFM, I went and worked on Broadway. So I was like, well, I've written 3 musicals. It's time to go to New York. And the first show that I worked on was at the Neil Simon Theater called Ragtime. It was an Ahrens and Flaherty show. And I started out as an observer. Basically, all the jobs were gone, and Lynn Ahrens, who wrote the lyrics, said, well, why don't you just sit by the music department and see what happens? And she knew I was a writer, like a young writer, and well, I wasn't that young. I was mid-age. But she was like, just see what happens and be ready. And so I had my computer with me, and the second day, they said like, oh, they were complaining about the person who was doing all the copy work, like putting all of the musical notes into a music notation program. And I was like, I've got that on my computer. I can do it for you now. And they're like, great, can you have it in the morning? And I was like, I have literally never opened that program in my life. But I knew it was my in. So I went home and taught myself the program and ended up doing the entire piano vocal score for Ragtime. And that's the one that went to MTI and got published. But I didn't write it. I just typed it and fixed a couple of things. The next thing that I did is I started working again with Ahrens and Flaherty on their next big show called Rocky. And it's Rocky Balboa, like talk about a strange choice for a musical. So Sylvester Stallone was one of the writers. There's Lynn Ahrens in the middle. Tom Meehan, who also wrote Annie and Spaceballs, if you're familiar with that movie. Steve Flaherty, who wrote the music. And we were going to open in Germany, as you do. So my job was to find a whole bunch of boxers who could dance, dancers who could box. So I'm like calling MMA studios. I'm calling like, these guys would come in with broken noses and I'm like, but can you move? And they're like, can I move? Da, da, da. Like, eventually these guys were like dancing and singing, but I also had to figure out who would build this 2-ton rotating boxing ring to spec. It had to be legal and people couldn't die on it. But it also had to rotate and shoot out over the audience. This was directed by Alex Timbers, who went on to do Moulin Rouge and pretty much everything that's making money on Broadway right now. But these are some stills from that. And then before that, like in between those shows, I was planning Broadway opening nights, which is basically like being a wedding planner where there's 2,000 people who all think they're the bride. And but this one was for Tom Hanks's play called Lucky Guy. And he was, I think he kind of looks like he should be driving a white van.
Yeah.
Right after that, I got a phone call from an author named Brian Selznick who had met my mother at a authors conference. And she had plugged me as a musical theater writer and sent him a whole bunch of my demos. Thanks, Mom. Which I was mortified. But instead, he was like, yeah, I want to write this show. And we ended up writing this musical, The Houdini Box, that premiered in Chicago in 2012 and is actually going to come back now next season. And then it opens again in New York at the New Victory. So that relationship also, like these relationships that you make, any relationship can become a pivotal relationship. If you show up and you work, like I really believe that you're like kind to everyone, work hard, do what you say, don't tell lies, follow through, and just be a human, like be an actual person. And those relationship seeds that you're planting, you never really know how it's going to pay off. Maybe you're the one paying somebody back later. Maybe they're the one that's helping you. But Brian is a Caldecott Award-winning children's book author, and he also wrote the screenplay for the movie Hugo and Wonderstruck, if you ever got to see those. So he also became one of my very first patrons when I started paper cutting and really supported me through those early years. I also wrote, weirdly, like a hit musical in Germany because opening Rocky in Germany put me in this new sphere. And at the end of college, I had like 20 extra credits and I decided to learn a language. So I took a German immersion class and came out the other side, like conversational in German, and went to Germany and wrote a musical. So that musical has been running for 10 years, and we're the highest grossing show in Germany during the 6 weeks that we run. They thought that we should have, like, this whole show is based off of this song called In die Weihnachtsbäckerei, which means in the Christmas bakery. And it's kind of like the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer of Germany. So it's like a really popular song that all the kids know. But it's about making Christmas cookies with your family, nothing seditious. And they were like, why don't we write a show that'll be like evil bakers that take over? And I'm like, you know, kids don't actually like shows like that. there's always like somebody evil that takes over the good people, and then the good people have to fight back. I'm like, kids just want to see like nice things happen to people they like, and stress and less stress, stress and less stress. So I was like, how about we have like some kids who have to make cookies by themselves because their parents get trapped in the big city, and there's a talking dog. So, and the talking dog became so famous that they made it into a stuffed animal. But that's a pretty exciting moment in a career. So right about then, my career started blending after Rocky Germany and planning Broadway opening nights. Theater work is month-to-month work. So you will earn enough to survive during your job and maybe a month past it. And then that work is gone, and you've got to figure out how to make rent, how to pay your bills. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. But I was planning these Broadway opening nights, and there was this guy who was this really kind of kooky guy that worked across the hall. And he was a producer of some sort, I think like opera. And one day he locked himself out of his office, and he was having like a big backers meeting, which means like all these people were going to come to decide if he was trustworthy enough to give millions of dollars to. And here he is locked out of his office. And I was like, I can use our office because the boss is upstairs one floor. Nobody ever comes down here. I'll impersonate your assistant. I'll give you like, come into our conference room. I know I said don't lie, but that doesn't mean like, like don't lie in a mean way. But come into this and we'll figure it out. And he was like, smart, good idea. And about a month later, my job was coming to an end. I only had 3 more days, and I probably had like 2 weeks left of cash. And I saw him in the elevator, and he was kind of huffing and puffing, grumbling. And I was like, oh, these puppeteers, I'm working with these puppeteers. You know how they are. And puppeteers are phenomenal and weird. Really like the strangest, most amazing type of artist. Like they are out there, and I find them like really special and fascinating. And I was like, you should hire me. I can make a puppet. I can make anything. And he's like, yeah, okay. Come to the storyboard meeting on Saturday, and we'll see if there's any puppet jobs for you. And I was like, great. So I went on Saturday down to Brooklyn to the studio, like under a highway, and I opened the door, and it's like a magical wonderland inside. And I look across, and I'm like, I think that's the educational manager from the New York Philharmonic. And I'm like, that's the director of the New York City Ballet. That's the outreach director from Lincoln Center. That's Matt Atchison, the puppet director of War Horse. I'm like, okay. I just stumbled into like puppet mecca heaven. And I had like brought chocolates, which paid off. But they showed us like all this Sharon Schnittel, like this paper cutting stuff was going across. All the puppet jobs were gone, and I was like, oh crap, another miss. But I was like, well, at least I got to see the studio. And then across the screen came all of this really intensive Swiss paper cutting. And he turned around and he's like, hey, you said you could make anything. Can you make that? And I remember doing like a body scan, like of my body. And I was like, I didn't want to hose myself, but at the same time, I needed the money so bad. And I heard myself just yell, yes. And then he's like, great, can I have 3 samples on Monday? And I was like, I just felt like, and I ran home and I looked for an X-Acto knife because I looked up online. I was like, I think people make paper cuts with X-Acto knives. And I looked up online at like some Swiss stuff, and I was like, I looked at my X-Acto knife and it was rusted shut. And then I remembered that I had grown up in the Pacific Northwest, like boating out in these like little islands. And starting from the age of 5, my dad would give me a knife every year because children should have knives. So I was like, the knife has a blade. The knife has a little blade on it. That's like a blade. And then I started to try to work. And this was what I did first. I folded this paper in half, and I kind of copied was inspired by some motifs I'd seen, like men drinking with hats on and inside a heart. But I was really struggling with the knife, and I kept like going across the page and going across the page. And I was like, I felt the panic rising in my stomach. And I was like, if I don't have these paper cuts done, there's no way I'm going to make rent. And so I flipped out the little scissors that are on the other side. And I don't know if you can see how big these are, but they are like, they're this size. What's so phenomenal about these scissors all of a sudden is that I had full range of motion in my wrist. When you use normal scissors, and most paper cutters make deathly fun of me for this. There's like 200 of us, and we're all friends. And we're all kind of like solitary librarian people. Some people use stuff like this, but this locks your wrist. And I was like, how in the world can you do what you're doing? But with this, I was like very nimble. And instead of cutting, it was actually more like 2D carving. So I was able to kind of like get in really small and dip and dive. So I went from this first attempt, and about, I think 6 or 7 hours later, I unfolded it and I had this. And I was like, look! And my boyfriend at the time like looked over at me and he's like, started laughing, and he fell off the couch and he's like, you're a paper cutting genius. I was like, I'm a paper cutting genius. Well, that's not genius now that I've seen what other people can do, but like Kara Walker, like that's a genius. This is just a cute paper cut, but not bad for number 1. This was number 2 and number 3. So this one, I just like maritime stuff, but you can see about the size that it is compared to the knife. All of my first pieces were the same size because the only paper I could find that worked was this like crummy CVS notepad that I had gotten at the drugstore. And they were all 6 by 9, like about this big. So all my first pieces were the same size. And then this is inspired by a German artist called Ida Bohata if you say it in German. But you can see that it's kind of like, almost looks more like an etching, like it's more chunky. There's some of the inspiration that I used. This was one of the first piece that I finished for Lincoln Center. We were going to pass these off to the puppeteers, and they were going to make them into flat panel puppetry, which you'll see in just a moment. That's the first one. It's little and cute. There's the second one, which you can also see there. Over there. I used 8 by 12 because I went to the art store and was touching all the paper and found like this really crispy, phenomenal paper called marker paper. And it's what people use to draw like Japanese comic books on. The paper is woven in a really special way that the weave stops the ink from bleeding. And I was really struggling with the scissors because when I would cut into the paper, at the tip of the cut would zip off to the right or to the left. And so I was getting all of these things falling, and I was like trying to tape them and panicking. And I also had to make a whole bunch of snowflakes. They also wanted me to do one that had alpenhorn, like cows with the beautiful flowers that they wear on their heads. So I don't actually draw anything out before I cut it. Like I don't trace or draw. I just kind of like hold a picture in my mind if I know what it looks like and like, well, start cutting. Or if I don't know exactly what a cow looks like, because you should have seen the first attempts, the cows. Well, maybe modern, they would be probably cool, but they did not look like what they were aiming for. So I pulled a cow up, and you just kind of like look at the cow, look at the cow, look at the cow. And bit by bit, you get there. That one ended up going to a sex therapist named Dr. Ruth. I don't know if your moms listened to her back in the 80s and 90s, but she was a pretty hot deal. She lived in my building, and I kept bumping into her in the elevator. We would speak together because we both spoke German, and she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm making these paper cuts for Lincoln Center." And she's like, "Oh." After I was on she was placed on an orphan train and sent to Switzerland and sent to a Christian orphanage that treated the Jewish kids pretty bad. But she said the joy that she had sometimes was that they would let them do paper cutting art. And so when I finished this piece, I brought the pieces over to her and let her pick one. And she said that like she saw it and she's like, these are all the happy memories that I have from that time, looking out the window and seeing the cows go by and everything. And when she passed away, that piece went into her collection at her son's house. So then we like blasted them out, and I also got to make one puppet. And the guys, the puppet team took over, and they rigged it up to all of these little strings. So I'm going to show you the prototype. We weren't allowed to film during the actual show, but you can see them kind of working on the back. What they're doing is they're working on very thin kind of balsa wood and cutting out around the art and then mounting it with these little levers. So like those little guys, their heads went like this, and the goats like would lift up and spin. And the Alp horns, nothing really happened except music was drifting by, and the cows' bells were going like that. If you look at the guys holding the big bells, in Switzerland, what they do is they take these gigantic cowbells and they swing them. But we realized after the puppeteers animated those that it looked like they were doing something else to the bells. So that got the cut. We did not do that one. And then the art was ended. It was on stage, so you can see the artwork in the left-hand corner. This is just during rehearsal. But then it was also cast up above the New York Philharmonic in the New York City Ballet when they were dancing. So it was pretty cool for your first. Let me make sure that the next one is not starting up and scaring us in a couple seconds.
How long did that take?
I feel like it took over 100 hours. I remember like realizing that the art form that I'd chosen is hyper lonely. Like you're just like dinky dinky dink. Like it is really painstakingly slow. The people who use the blades, they can go a lot faster, so they can generate a lot more material. But everybody's got their own style and journey. But yeah, that one probably took about 100 hours. As I started to get better at it, they took me longer. So let's see, that's Lincoln Center, Broadway, blah. Working on Rocky. Then he showed up again about another one. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I just thought you might want to see backstage of a Broadway show because it's kind of fun. But the theater world and my art world started to do this a lot. And so I started doing a lot of pieces for Broadway opening nights and really special bespoke commission gifts for people, mostly for opening nights. And then I threw one in for myself. This is something that I've been struggling with over the past 13 years, is balancing the commission work with the actual artwork. So there's art that you make on commission, and when somebody approaches me, they're like, here's a list of 60 things that we want you to include in the paper cut. Or we want this. And then you have to jump to their specs. You're still creating art and you're still putting your own artistic spin on it, but it's not something that originated in your heart. And so that's something that I'm really dealing with right now, is what's commissioned and what's actually mine. This is a piece that I made really early on. That's my sister and I feeding our cats. But we really believed stuff like that was happening underneath our floorboards. That's actually a replica that I made of it, because I had to send one to a museum. The real first one is over there, and you can see that it's it's not straight across the top. And one of the girls is a little thicker than the other, which is fine. So we're going to take a look at some of the commissions so that you can see the type of work that I do when I'm working on a commission, because it is really different from the work I do when it's just art. Although this one was different. This woman said, I don't want to tell you anything about myself. I want to talk to you for an hour and show you my apartment. And then you do you. And her name was Gretchen Jones. She won Project Runway season 7. So when I first started out, I was like, how am I going to turn this into a career? How am I going to make this something that can pay the bills, because I really like doing it. And musicals takes about 7 to 10 years to get off the ground. So you don't get paid sometimes for a decade, right? Like you might get 5,000 here or 500 here, but I needed something that would kind of like sustain me. So I decided that I would call every famous person I knew, or even famous adjacent, and tell them that I would make a paper cut for them for $50 if I could use their name on my website. And then I built a website, and the next day I got a call from the New Yorker. And yeah, so it worked. But I'm just going to show you one of the first commissions that I did. Another guy, it was Brian Selznick again. He said, I'd like you to do the entire plot of the movie Being There. If you know that Peter Sellers movie with Shirley MacLaine, it's kind of like this very beautiful, strange, lovely movie. And it was his husband's favorite movie. So we start here. And again, I'm just like, okay, I've seen that movie. The dude walks across the water. So I started out thinking that Chauncey was a gardener. So I'm going to include a lot of vines. And also there was a lot to do with televisions. So I was like, I'm going to fold the paper into 4 and have 4 little televisions at each corner. So one television at each corner. And that was kind of like the general concept I started with. And then I opened it up. So now that paper is folded in half. And I put Chauncey, like, there was something with you know the plot very well. But he was in the hospital, like his boss was dying. So he was in the hospital a lot. And then I was like, and he goes to Washington, D.C. So I had him like walking with his briefcase to Washington, D.C. because that's a major plot point in the movie. And I think there's 2 hospital scenes too, so that worked out. And then there's this moment in the movie where he gets in a car crash. And so I had to figure out, like, I wanted it to be symmetrical, but I also wanted it to tell the story. And so instead of having it like double folded, I did one section first and then the other section where he's getting hit, and he's getting smashed by the car. And then I started to work on the final theme of the movie where he's like walking out into the water. He walks on top of the water. It's spectacular. And I had to figure out, how do you float a person on water? And so my dad has this skill as an architect and designer where he can hold something in his mind, like a picture in his mind. And even like 30, 40 years later, if you ask him where like the water shutoff valve is in a house that he built in like 1970, he'll be like, go downstairs, take a left, 1, 2, 3 steps, small steps, lean down to this part of the wall, open the door, 3rd switch up on the left, toggle it twice. And my brain, to my surprise, does the same thing. I had no clue. So my brain would hold these pictures, and in my brain, I would manipulate the pictures and they would slide. So when I'm cutting, I see a fog and I make one thing happen, and then like out of the fog, something else appears. And so then I cut that, and then that like makes something else appear in the fog. But at the same time, you're planning ahead where to leave these uncut places that are going to be your joining components. So you can kind of, because if you mess up, then it just, it all falls apart. And I was like a purist. I thought like if you use tape or glue that you were a piece of crap. But now I use tape all the time, archival tape. And you can see here, like I had made a big mistake and those 2 pieces fell out. So I was like, oops. And then I just taped in something. It's way easier. And then there's Shirley MacLaine kissing him because she falls in love. And then she ended up seeing that piece, and she ended up seeing the piece and ended up having her goddaughter commission something for her 80th birthday.
Shirley MacLaine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, that's me. I don't know why it says my name right on it. This was a piece that I did for a director named John Tiffany for the Broadway opening of Glass Menagerie. It was a production starring Cherry Jones and Celia Keenan-Bolger. And the set, what they did is they invited me to come and see the play. And they're like, just get inspired by what you see. Those are the commissions that go the most artistically. Like I do feel like I'm creating art because I'm responding to somebody else's output rather than when you're working off a list, you're kind of like doing something else for someone. The stage was built of all of these kind of stacked hexagons, and it had this very strange ethereal staircase. And I don't know if you can see at the very top, there's like two little feet. That's Tom. Tom's escaping. He's like the brother of the family, and he's able to escape. At the very end, the daughter dives into the couch and disappears. So that's what I made. And the assistant director, he came and he picked up all of the paper cuts. And then I saw him on the street like a year later, and I was like, so how did John like the cut? And his eyes kind of like did the uh-oh thing. And I was like, how did he like it? And he had kept it for himself. And I had done it at a cut rate because I was trying to build my clientele. And so I told him that I would call the New York Times and like out him publicly, or he could give the piece to John Tiffany. And he made the right decision. Nobody messes with me. I look nice. I have a sweet little high voice, but I'll get you. You already saw that. Oh, you already saw that. That ended up getting into the New York Times when they did a kind of retrospective on Lynn Aaron's apartment, and that helped out a lot too. Not as much as you would think, though. Like, I think as an artist, you have like these moments where you're like, oh, wow, I'm in the New Yorker. Now I'm going to make a living. And things happen and things change, but it's really like, it can and it can't. Like, it doesn't guarantee anything. So you continue to bump along and do your art. These are more Broadway opening nights. So, well, this one was at the Kennedy Center back when it was just the Kennedy Center, which hopefully it truly is again someday, and it is now. This was for a Little Dancer by Aronson Flaherty again. This was for the opening of Hunchback of Notre Dame at Paper Mill Playhouse before it started touring nationally. With this piece, I started with the Rosetta window and built the entire piece off of that. And there's lots of little Easter eggs kind of hidden in there. Like the saints are Saint Stephen and Saint whoever the book writers, oh my gosh. When I get warm, I start forgetting things. So, but Stephen Schwartz wrote the music. So I was like hiding all these little things in there. And then everybody else got like a photograph of it. The bells actually swing. And then this, it was a piece built around Degas. That's the piece that went to Shirley MacLaine for her birthday. It's actually made from a piece of Hal Prince's stationery. He's a legendary Broadway producer and director. And my boyfriend at the time was working for him. And I was working for a writer named Joseph Stein who wrote Fiddler on the Roof. And sometimes I would be like writing an email impersonating Joe Stein to Hal Prince. And I'd get an email back and I was from Hal, and we'd get home at night, and I'm like, oh, I was writing Hal all day, and he's like, I was writing Joe all day. And it was just us writing each other, pretending to be our bosses. But he was able to get me a piece of stationery from Hal's office because Hal gave Shirley her big break. She was the understudy for the Pajama Game and was able to like go in and take over that part. So it had like a special meaning. You can see the little spaceships. That's all like about her spaceship stuff. And then that's her walking the Camino one way as Shirley MacLaine and riding the horseback as her past life self. And that's her little dog. That was for the 50th anniversary of Fiddler on the Roof, and that's in the Joe Stein collection. That's my desk. Things like get really tangled up. The paper cuts look really fragile, and they are, but like obviously like I'm handling them all day long, like twisting them around and like flipping them around. Most of the other paper cutters I know, everything is taped down flat on a board, and they're tracing a photograph or they're tracing a drawing. But I just don't know how they do it. I've tried to do that stuff, and when I do it, my work comes out looking sterile. Their work comes out looking lovely. But I really struggle with that. More pieces of my desk. But this one is one that I started to work on as a commission. And so that's the difference where like I did get like a 16-page dossier about this couple's 40-year life together. And they had like songs from Sondheim that were really precious to them, houses, and down at the bottom you can see like the theater where they first worked together, the church they got married, their first apartment in England. But they just told me about their first apartment in England, and then I went on like Google Earth and like searched it out and researched it and then brought it back to life. Houses are the only things that I'll sketch out beforehand because houses have to be so specific. But since my dad was an architect, he taught me how to draft, and so I have like drafting tools that I use to do that. I drink a lot of tea. That's the piece finished, and this was my beloved framer, Alon, who will make a surprise appearance again later when you see the bad thing that happened to me. It's not by his hands. This book was for a magazine cover. They wanted to do something that kind of flipped casting on its head. So this was for the magazine called The Dramatist, and it's like the trade magazine for everybody who writes musicals, the composers and the lyricists and book writers. And so my little cousin Hannah Chow is, she's half Chinese, 1/4 Japanese and 1/4 German American, but she had been cast as Hamlet in her high school play in Hong Kong. So I decided to to take the actual script of Hamlet and pull a page out and paper cut her onto it, and then cast a shadow light onto the page that has the list of the cast members on it. So it was like all these different kind of plays on words of the word cast. Woo. But it was really hard to cut that mushy paper. So this was an old book, and a lot of people who are paper cutting, some of them work in books, and I had to put a piece of like clear contact paper on the back because it was just like disintegrating in my hands. And then that's one magazine I did, but that's how it ended up on the magazine cover. But again, it's like theater and writing and theater. That's kind of a process of like what it looked like before it went on, and that's like a vellum cover that they decided to put on, so it's like a clear one. I just thought doing the book was fun, so I made another one. But this is Henry V, and in the day you can see all of like this speech from St. Crispin's Day. So this is cut from the St. Crispin's Day speech, and it's this absolutely phenomenal speech about, well, I always cry when I talk about it, but it's about how everybody who was there that day, even if you died that day, the rest of the people who weren't there are going to live the rest of their lives wishing that they had fought by your side. And I made that piece for a producer that like just was a champion for us, who like truly was like, it was like if you were back in time, you would have been like Prince Henry, like you would have been like Prince Hal. Like he had that kind of magical galvanizing force and incredibly kind. I was commissioned by Only Murders in the Building to make a paper cut of season 3 for the wrap. One thing that I learned about the difference between doing a commission for a Broadway show and doing a commission for a Hollywood show is that you can live a while when you do something for Hollywood. What was fun about this is that they kind of came to me, like I liked the show. I thought it was a really fun show. And all they said was, we just want the meet cute where the 3 characters are meeting in the elevator. So if you've seen this show, it's actually kind of like a mystery murder show, and there's lots of clues. Every time the credits kind of come up at the beginning, you see the building of the Arconia. So they were like, and we also want the front of the Arconia. So I kind of had to draft that out in my brain and figure out like how I could include all these little clues. And there's a laser cut print of that there, and you're welcome to like touch it and look at it if you want to. But what I tried to do is kind of preserve that opening scene of having all of the little windows floating around. And the windows where like Selena's character and Steve Martin's character and Martin Short's character were in, I left the items that they were using as if they had just left the windows. So there's like a wine glass, a frying pan, some art materials. And then the rest I filled in with other things like all the pets that got killed on that show, like the award, the Peabody Award for the podcasting, And I tried to like hide lots of other little clues in there so that this, like Selena Gomez ended up with the real one, and then Steve Martin got one in Martin Short, and like everybody who's like all the writers, all the producers had a laser cut. But I had to learn how to do like a vector image to do that, which you know all about. And then you can convert it and burn them. There's like this whole thing in the paper cutting world if a laser cut is legal. Right? I'm split. I think if you are making something that's on a commission and they say we need 20 copies of it, like what are you going to do? Sit there for like 8 years? No. But I know some people design things on computers and then have it laser cut, and they're like, I'm a paper cutting artist. And I'm like, you're a computer artist, and that is also phenomenal. But I think that there's something about the hand cut nature of it that has mistakes. And when I took this to be vectorized, the graphic designer was like starting to smooth out all of the mistakes. And I was like, you have to leave the bumps. You have to leave all of that, because that's the breath of the art. Like that's the human touch of the art. So even the laser cuts still kind of look real. This is the only piece, another piece where I was like, I want to make something for myself. And I made this little piece sitting with my dad. It was the last year that my dad was alive, and we were spending our last Christmas together, but I didn't know it. But that piece is like, every time I see it, it's like in my mother's house. Like my dad touched that piece a lot. So like, and he had such joy in everything my sister and I do. My sister's an actor. Everything that we do, he would like hang up in his office, and like, I can't tell you how impactful, supportive, and loving parents are. Anything that I wanted to do, my dad would drive me or say go, and my mom the same. So thank you to both of them. This was a piece that I made for Cameron McIntosh, who's like a UK director. And this was for the wrap of a series on Netflix that's called The Marines, if you've just seen it. They interviewed a whole bunch of people in the Marines, and the kind of takeaway that they came back from was that they used to be just training, and now they're actively preparing for World War III. That was a chilling, and I don't like to cut guns and bombs, but I do like to make a living. But I was like, okay, I'm going to challenge myself. I'll cut a drone, like, but it was strange. So it was, I didn't want to cut actual like weaponry, so I had to kind of navigate around that. If you are familiar with the musical Mentiras in Mexico City, this is my friend Jose Manuel Lopez Velarde, and he and I were working on a show together called ABZ. I kind of like started to go back to theater again. Doing the paper cutting started to put me back in touch with people who wanted to write. So it kind of like looped me back around instead of taking me completely away from what I liked to do. It just kept blending things back together. But after my dad passed away, I took a year off and taught in the Bronx for a year. And I think I was teaching theater, but clearly I was deviating from the lesson plan. And we did a lot of art in that class as well. Just to show a little bit about how I use my art in theater as production and set design. This was for that show, that cursed show, that was Hansel and Gretel and Heidi and Gunther. It's like a dark comedy about what would happen if Gretel, instead of the witch getting killed all the way, Gretel like pushes the witch into the oven, and the finger of the witch gets severed. And this tells the story of our whole show. So it starts down in the corner at the woodcutter's house, and then the children escape through the town of Lüneburg, Germany, through the forest, and then they find the gingerbread house. They get snapped by the witch's smoke that's evil, and then kind of tumbled around and they land themselves into cages. In our show, we had like these singing children's severed heads, and so they were all these like severed heads in jars, just 3, and they would like sing like a Greek chorus kind of. And the witch was like this creepy witch. We've had it played by men, we've had it played by women, we've had it played by non-gendered people, because the witch for us was hunger. it was not a witch. The witch was something that you cannot kill. And what we liked about this concept of hunger is that it comes back every morning. Like, no matter what you do to stop your hunger surfaces again and it'll get you. So what we did in the show, and like visually what we were thinking about with the show, is that the witch reconstitutes after 30 years from the finger. She reconstituted back into the witch, and she comes and finds Gretel living as a single mother in Chicago in modern times. Gets the kids to eat sugar, and as soon as they're like drunk on sugar, she snatches them, or it snatches them and takes them back to the 1300s. But we had a lot of stuff from the actual history of the 1300s when the famine ripped through there. People legit were eating their neighbors' kids and cats. Like, there was no food, and this famine was so severe that story of Hansel and Gretel kind of rose up out of that. And I don't know about you, but as a little kid, I was so messed up by that story, Hansel and Gretel. Like, I've been obsessed with that story since I was a little kid, because I remember, like, I would think, who in the world, like, what type of parent would trade food for their own child? And it just really messed up my brain. And I find myself coming back to that theme quite a lot in stories that I write. Like, children are often locked in kitchens in my stories, or they're like imprisoned or whatever. Like, I think about bad parents and like how that plays out. But this piece, actually, you can see the prototype for that piece is here. I started out with the central panel because we were going to be using it for when Gretel goes back into, she has like a PTSD flashback. And when she has this PTSD flashback, that paper cut comes swirling up behind her, and the gingerbread house kind of comes alive. That finished piece is what dropped down on the scrim. So when people first come in, there's this real fairy tale feel. And then they also used it for like not only for the cover, but also when we got canceled, they were so kind to use my art to let me know that I just lost my entire living for the next 2 years. Thanks for that memory. With collaboration, I started to like try to look for other ways to use the art that wasn't just like sitting alone. Paper cutting is horrifically lonely. And you let me know. Okay. So I have this beautiful painter friend named Chris Ames, and he paints with these like really vibrant colors. And a friend of ours was doing a show called The Lion. It was like a one-man show. And Chris did this layered painting on multiple layers of plexi. So when it put it together, that lion is actually kind of like a 3D effect. And then I took the lyrics of the show, like key lyrics, and made like a lattice work that went over the lion. And the light came through it. Then we passed that over to another guy who somehow mounted it in like a broken guitar, because the whole show is played by the guy live on his guitar. And they took one of his old guitars and mounted it into a light box. That was a poem that my sister's father-in-law wrote. But these are like collaborations. I asked him to send me 3 poems, and then we kind of take off from there. I was asked to do a TED Talk for TEDx Broadway, and what they wanted me to do is like kind of give like a little overview of paper cutting. But then I was downstairs in the theater space, and as people would come out of these talks, they would come over and tell me what had been meaningful to them, and then I would try to incorporate it into the paper. But it had to be really, really big so that we could see it on stage. And that I found I had to use like a knife. We'll just kind of flip through. This too, again, came from Brian. He had an idea for a tuba, but he gave me the prototype, and then I had to kind of bring it to life. Wow. So you can see the process of how it. And it took like that. And then they mount the contract, the wedding contract is mounted in the center. There's some little details. So they wanted like St. Louis on one side, they wanted the couple's dogs. I included a lot of pomegranates and like very special words in Hebrew. So I had to like learn how to, well, the first book that I wrote, I accidentally wrote the Hebrew going left to right. So then I had to like fix it and go the other direction. But a lot of the work that I do too, I'm starting to do a lot more work in shadow. Oh, this is my tragic story to artists. Always get insurance. So at the beginning of this summer, I'm showing you, we had like a heat dome summer in Washington State where it was so hot that like the clams and mussels on the beach were exploding and like cooking in their own shells and popping open. And I learned this technique where you soak leaves in glycerin and you can cut them, but I was inspired by our horrible summer. I was commissioned to make this like meter-long panorama of the New York City skyline. And I thought to the woman who asked me to do it was my book agent, and she'd been waiting for a book for me for quite some time. And so I asked her what her budget was, and I accepted because I thought, squares, how hard can that be? And about a month into the process, I realized I wasn't creating a $1,500 piece. I was creating a $30,000 piece. But I had made a promise, and I don't know. So I decided to finish it. We had a conversation about it, and I was like, I'll just finish it. I'll learn something, and that'll be worth the money that I'm not going to get. But maybe I'll like vectorize it and sell prints, which I'm still on the way to do. There's my little signature. So it took me about 500 hours. It took 4 months of being alone. Like there were days where I would just like scream at the top of my voice, like that MFUK word, like mother, like where you're just like, or sobbing. And like, it's so boring to make a paper cut that's that big. And the most boring part is that I had to draft everything. And I had, like, if I made a cut, I would have to take a breath and hold my breath and then go like tick, 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 tick down a perfectly metered architectural tool. And then I would breathe. And then I would take my breath again and then tick, 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 tick for 4 months. And I ended up getting like a really strong core. But it was a brutal process. Here's some kind of close-up picture so you can kind of see like there's little people in the windows and like the Woolworth building and the Empire State Building. There's me typing on my computer. There we go. Little pigeons. And those people, they're like this big, right? More kind of details. And then I got a call from my client and she said that something looked wrong on the wall. And I was like, well, what do you mean looks wrong? And she said, well, the Empire State Building is down where the Statue of Liberty is supposed to be. I'm like, oh, well, that's no big deal, right? Because I told them not to use glue, and we went to the same place I always go to, and Alam is there, like he knows not to use glue. Just take it back and they'll flip it over. Well, Alam was not there that day when they framed it, and the owner, who you can see he's a charming gentleman, he gave it to a new kid, and the kid didn't see any of the orientation pictures that I dropped off, and he sprayed it with spray glue and glued it face down onto a mat board. Oh. So he held this up and he's like, is this the right orientation? And he texted me, and I was like, yeah, that's the right orientation. And then I zoomed in and I started to see all these black marks and smudges, and then I noticed that the top of the Empire State Building was not attached. So you can see like how it looked when I dropped it off, and I was trying to circle like from the photos what I could see what was wrong, and that was nothing compared to when I saw it in person. So I asked him if I could do an insurance claim because I just assumed that any business owner would have insurance. And he started screaming at me on the phone and calling me words that I'd never heard strung together before. And he said I was out for money and he didn't have insurance, and I could basically go do whatever I wanted to myself with myself. And I remember like ringing in my ears and thinking like, well, I'll just get a lawyer. And the lawyers talked to me about the difference in legal strategies between my country, and they're like, you're going to chase him till the end of time. Like, this is a blood sport, and we just talked to him on the phone, and you're going to supersede the value by the time you catch it. So I had to walk. I think I laid in my bed for a few days, and I really struggled to make anything else for about a year. Because I'd also just had the musical go down. So I just put 7 years into a musical and got nothing. And then I put 4 months into this piece and got nothing. So I took it to an art restorer and asked them like if they could fix it. And he said he could, but it would take 2 years and $40,000. So, and he was pretty affordable. But he said that maybe he could teach me how to do it. But I was just kind of like, I remember like almost fainting and being like, well, goodbye. And I just like, I didn't have enough, I hadn't been paid for years. And the pandemic had happened and I'd lived off my savings and I had nothing. So I couldn't even afford to pay to learn how to do it. But then after a year went by, I decided I would cut it again. So I had the ruined piece and I traced it. And then like tracings just don't work, like everything moves around. And so I just cut it again. But I took the airplane out because that always bothered me because of the Twin Towers. And I actually was able to fix a whole bunch of things in the design. I was able to like fix things that I had done poorly the first time or that I felt I'd done poorly. And then I had like earned a little bit of money and I went back to the art restorer and I took a 2-hour class with him and he showed me how to use a medical scalpel and acetone and you spit actually, and you can get the paper up off. So it took me a month and a half to get the paper off the mat. And then I began the painstaking process of rebuilding it with microscopic pieces of tape that I cut about the width of an eyelash. And I rebuilt that bottom piece and sent it to my client because I thought that was fair if I kept the better one. And that one is now in a museum in Racine, Wisconsin. Although it's coming home today, so if you want to buy it. So you can see, like, here's the first one that I did, and then you can see there all of the things that I fixed. Like, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was pretty jacked up over here, and then I solidified it. Like, I'd learned a lot in the 3 years between making the first one and making the second one. Like, I had learned a lot about structural integrity. That first piece, when you hung it, it actually needed glue, or it was going to slowly sag over time. And I learned how to re-engineer it so that every piece was being held, so that even like 100 years from now, that piece will hold itself up like a bra. So after all this commissioning, I was pretty burned out, like making art for other people and kind of fulfilling other people's dreams. Although I still really enjoy doing that kind of in between, I wanted to do something for myself. And so I started going ahead and writing and illustrating a book called The Brambles. And it's based on my dad's childhood, which is basically a childhood that would functionally create a serial killer. But instead, my dad became this incredibly loving and good person who was like a community leader. He identified people in his community that he could follow instead of following his father. So this is how I represent the parents in the book. Like, it's not my dad's story exactly, but he lives in a house where the parents are wolves, and everything's been going along fine until he's about to go into 6th grade, and then the wolves start to pull up the pressure. And the boy has to figure out how to protect himself from his own parents. And so he's in his room and he can hear the wolves at the door. And he's trying to figure out what to do. And he starts sprouting these brambles out of his veins. And they grow. And they grow. So this book, like, I'm still in the process of making this book now. But basically he gets kind of encased in this bramble patch. And while he's at home with his parents, he's able to navigate his life with them. Like, they back up and he can like go make himself a sandwich. He can move around inside the house. But when he goes back to school, the brambles start to whip out and like cut his friends. And like the teachers can't see him through the brambles. They stop calling on him. And he becomes incredibly isolated. And then his best friend sees him like underneath the coats in the coat closet. And she sends a little note in on a coat hanger that says, "Are you in there?" And he sends a note back out that says, "Help." Mm-hmm. And so, like, sorry, I think about my dad and I wish that he had help. But she talks to her grandmother and is like, "Michael's in a bramble patch." And the grandma's like, "The hell?" Like, what? They go and take him and they figure out how to he has to get himself out. So it is kind of like about trauma, like how you take trauma that's given to you and you build a defense mechanism, but that defense mechanism, it's only functional inside the trauma. And unfortunately, it's all up to you to figure out how to get back out of it once you're moving on from that time. And then here's what I'd like to be doing. So I'm just putting it out there. Like I was trying to think of like other ways that you could use the art in big ways and kind of like have these storytelling moments that go across big public spaces. That's the library. That's the last library my dad built before he passed away. And then I have this idea of like I've been playing a lot with the shadows of the work. And for me, oftentimes the shadow is actually the art and not the paper. And I would love to like make these cantilevered like story walkways. So as the people walk under the walkways, the story gets cast on their skin. And as like the sun moves across the panels, like the story would shift and move. And I think it would be kind of beautiful in certain communities to like tell the story of the community or the people that live there, and then have that be able to go onto their bodies. And maybe I'll make some tarot cards. So this is me kind of decommissioning myself. The last piece that I made, I got a phone call and I thought it was like a spam because I got this really weird email that asked me to be part of a museum show at the Racine Art Museum in Wisconsin. They have the largest holding of American craft. So it's like hyper-focused on folk art and craft. And I'd had this idea kicking around in my head since I lived here about a Hansel and Gretel story that was set on the Mexican-American border. And I'd written like a pilot, but it was like kind of raunchy, I don't know. But I had this idea with the paper cutting of that was based on my friend Bilsom's childhood story. And his parents used to come across the border back and forth, back and forth. He was born in the States, but they weren't. And they left him when he was 4 years old with two coyotes at the border. And they left him there for 2 years while they were in the US. And he kind of thought of them as his grandparents, but they weren't. And he was put to work at the fence, and his job was to play with his matchbox cars until the coast was clear and then to lift the fence. And so I had this, like, after he talked to me about his story of his parents, I finally took the step to make this piece because I didn't want the Hansel and Gretel piece to go to the museum without my piece going with it. Like I wanted something that was just mine. So in the Hansel and Gretel story, I don't know if you remember, but Hansel tricks the witch by like holding out a little chicken bone, and the witch keeps thinking he's skinny, but he's not, he's fat. And so they get kidnapped and they go, they get sold and working for a chicken processing plant. And Hansel's like holding out the little wishbone. There's lots of little references to Hansel and Gretel hidden in it. And it also mirrors the story of the other piece. That's the finished piece. So you can see instead of starting out here in the woodcutter's house, they start out in like a little concrete blockhouse, go through the town. They get on La Bestia, and like the little kids getting on La Bestia are like this big. And then they go across the river and there's the coyote, and then through the fence, they get picked up by someone who they think is trustworthy. And instead they go to work. They get locked in like a bunk house, like those parents did, and work for the chicken plant. But they escape and make their way back home again. And in the center, instead of having the gingerbread house, I had this conversation once when I was living here with this guy in China at a taco stand. And he was talking to me about like what it was really like in the United States. And he's like, you guys really tricked us. It's like I got there and it was not what I was picturing on like Full House. Like, and it was a really difficult story that he had. So we had like, instead of the gingerbread house, it's like what they were picturing was going to happen, and then what actually happened to them. Just like here, they thought it was going to be cookies, but it was shit. And here's just some pictures from the museum. That's my friend Sam, who did that blackbird paint, the blackbird cut at the beginning. It was surreal to like go to the museum. I stopped on my way back from Norway, where I teach musical theater writing there every 3 years, and I was on my way back, and I like diverted to go see this exhibit, and like to hear people talking about your work but not know that you made it is really strange and kind of special. Like he was really looking at it. And there's Sam's piece. Oh, there's another one of Sam's pieces there, the circle. And Kara Walker and Michael Delaquette were a part of that show. And there's my little stuff. You already saw it, so I'm going to go fast because this is the end. The way that I framed it was all with like a piece of museum grade plexi, and then the art, and then another piece of plexi behind it, suspended over this really vibrant paper called Locta paper. It's kind of like made with almost like a banana leaf, but it's not a banana leaf, it's Locta. And it holds its color, but it allowed, when you have the paper pressed right against a mat board, it just looks like an etching. Like it's hard to see that it's something else. So this allowed that shadow to be cast. That's not my really first one. I was so traumatized after that piece got destroyed that I could not like put the original pieces in the shipping box to go to the museum. So I made replicas of everything except for that the piece set on the border. That one I was just like, one chance. And that one, that's my dad as a little boy and as I'd grown up. And he really was like in a bramble patch. If you met him, like you would get up close to him, and at first you would feel like prickles as he kind of created space. But if you wove your way in, the person in the center was like incredibly kind and moral. And I watched him over the course of his life taking these out. So he was so desperate to be like a good and loving dad. But to watch somebody process trauma for 40 years is a process. And that's how that ended up getting framed. That's how that did. The end. Thank you for your attention and thank you for your patience, but I'm happy to answer any questions. You're welcome to come up here, and you can touch that one, the one of Only Murders in the Building. You're also welcome to touch this. This is like something that's in progress that I'm probably going to abandon. So if you want to see how delicate it is and what it's like, this is when I just was like, I want to create a tile floor on an elliptic. And so I folded it first like this, and I have my little scissors, and I just kind of like, and then I went back through and like made the next shape. And then I kind of like spun the cutting as I went. And then I thought, well, it's kind of your house, Georgia. So it's like, but then what I thought I would do is make a swimming pool and then have like a dead bird in the pool. The other piece that I'm working on right now is from this, I used to work at a school in the Bronx, the Bronx Charter School for the Arts. And I was in Hunts Point in the Bronx, which is a pretty complicated neighborhood. And these kids had seen murders by the time they were second, third grade. They'd had parents die, parents incarcerated. And we were working in this neighborhood where at least 25% of the kids statistically should have been being harmed by their parents at home in like really specific ways. And I remember thinking, should be, like statistically should be. Like working in that school, I didn't understand what poverty was until I got to that school. And then I realized that that was just one American school and that this was being replicated all the way across my country. We also had a lot of lockdowns, and we weren't allowed to work on Halloween. We had to step over like fresh blood and syringes and like to get to school. And one of the scariest parts of our school is that they would have us practice like these active shooter drills and with kindergartners. And what they've learned since then is that it actually doesn't improve the chances of children to go through those drills. It improves their chances if the teachers go through the drills. But it traumatizes the children as if they've gone through an active shooter experience to go through the drills. But our school kept doing them. And I kept having these nightmares. And so this piece that I'm working on right now that I'll send out through, but it is like, it's called Blind Corner, and it's my classroom. And my classroom was the first classroom that you got to if you came in the building, and it was a panel of windows that went all the way down to the floor. And there was no way to protect the kids inside the classroom. And all of the doors you had to go outside and lock from the outside. So I would have to step into active fire to lock the door. And then, I don't know, and then you could shut the door and it would lock. So I built what are those things where you put files? File cabinet. I built file cabinets and tried to build my own blind corner. And I remember like hiding with the kids, and they were like wetting their pants and like, I don't know. So that's like, but I've been thinking about this piece for years, and I'm like, how do you make that into art without, I don't know. But that's what I've been paper cutting lately. But instead of kids, it's like little creatures. So see that soon. And on that cheerful note, we'll go home. But yeah, if you'd like to see anything else, or if you'd like to try cutting paper, I'll like leave these little scissors out, and you're welcome to give it a whirl. Thanks for coming. And thanks to my fellow in Georgia.
No, thank you.
We got a small present for you.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing.